Welcome to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro New Zealand, the podcast series dedicated to exploring technology-related insights with market-leading guests. I'm your host, Jamie Hall, and today I'm here with Darren Oxlee, SMB lead for Modern Workplace and Security at Microsoft. In this episode, we dive into the high-stakes world of cybersecurity. We'll discuss its impact, where SMBs can focus to mitigate risks, and some helpful resources to help strengthen and support a cybersecurity strategy. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts. Thanks for coming along, Darren. It's great to have you here.
Oh, so great to be here.
Yeah, but before we dig into cybersecurity and the SMB aspect of it, I did really want you to share a little bit about yourself and a bit about your background. So
yeah, absolutely. So really fortunate. I've had a broad and diverse career over the last too many years, probably. I've worked across 3 continents. I worked in the UK, South Africa, and most recently, obviously, in Aotearoa, New Zealand. The majority of my career has been in small and medium business in various guises, about 16 of that at Microsoft. And I've also been a customer, so I was the CTO of an engineering company for a while. So kind of got a good lens on both what it takes to service technology in small and medium businesses, both from a vendor perspective and also as a customer.
Awesome. And obviously that's led you to Microsoft here in New Zealand and the role that you're in now. Tell us a bit about that.
So really fortunate to come out in 2019 from South Africa as the SMB lead for Microsoft New Zealand. And yes, current role looks after what we call our modern workplace practice across Australia and New Zealand.
Great. I mean, it must expose you to a lot of New Zealand businesses now. You must see a whole raft and range of different approaches to business. Tell us a little bit about sort of what you see and experience.
I think it's exactly that, right? Every business is different in terms of its nature, and every business's approach to cybersecurity also tends to vary. And we go from those that are completely apathetic about security in general to those that have been hacked and have literally paid the price.
Yeah, it's really tough out there when it comes to small business. And if we think about the New Zealand kind of perspective, there's over 500,000 businesses that MB tell us are small to medium size. And when you do the math on that, that's like over a third of our GDP when you factor all of that in. So there's no doubt we have a heavy reliance on SMBs for our success as a nation. But from your experience, what are some of the unique cyber trends that you see when really focusing on that SMB space?
Yeah, I think maybe just for a little bit of context, I think the growth in cybercrime as a like almost an economy is staggering, right? In 2022, it's estimated that cybercrime was worth around $8.5 trillion US, right? Wow. In 3 years, we're expecting, by 2024, or this year, they're expecting that to be around $24 trillion, which is a 3-fold increase. So the investment from a bad actor perspective into this because of the size is just, it's really significant. And I think that then on the SMB side, I think that there's this perception from small and medium businesses, because they're small, they think they're too small to be targeted. That's just simply not the case, right? And whilst you might find bigger entities like government agencies or governments that are obvious targets, SMBs are absolutely targets too. And the challenge is that it's really destructive, and businesses sometimes don't survive. In fact, 60% that suffer a major breach are closed within 6 months. So it's really serious.
It's really, really serious. So is there any, talking on those sort of trends, is there any specifics or any areas that stand out from an SMB perspective that kind of make that area more unique?
Yeah, I think, again, it goes back to the split between what you need to do in terms of, from a bad actor perspective. You cannot control what's happening from a bad actor perspective. What you can control over is what's happening within your own business. And I think that, if you think that, for example, 75% of people coming to work at the moment are bringing their own AI tools in, and that on its own is proposing quite a significant risk to businesses.
Certainly is. And I mean, you must have seen some situations in your travels, right? I mean, surely you've got some great examples. Is there any that you can share without, dropping anyone in it?
Oh, yeah. I'll start by dropping myself into it, right? I'll use a classic example of how I got breached. And I mean, I work in this space, but it just shows you. And I was expecting a delivery from one of the New Zealand courier companies for a book that I was taking back to South Africa for my mum's birthday. And it was running late. It was getting close to time to fly. And I got an SMS saying, your parcel's delayed because you owe $3.56, whatever it is, click here to pay. And I was like, oh, click the button, $4,600 out of my bank account within 5 minutes. So I got breached. And of course, I felt like an absolute idiot, but it just shows you kind of under the circumstances, the timing of the SMS was, really, really timely. But yeah, so that's the personal experience. From a business perspective, yeah, we get these stories sort of on an ongoing basis, and maybe a couple of examples. One was also a New Zealand-based company it's relatively small, a couple of less than 20 employees, but they've got staff dotted around the world. And one of the employees in Europe had a problem with her laptop, swapped it out, got a new laptop, and then signed into the company's tenant with the new laptop. And there was a piece of malware on that laptop that went and scrambled, got access to the SharePoint site that she as a user had access to, and went and scrambled 20,000+ files, renamed them, moved them. And I mean, for a small business that doesn't have the resources to go and kind of sort that kind of thing out, they had to then go manually file by file and clean that up. Another example is a manufacturing company, also is here in New Zealand. They had a student that came in during one of the holidays, and this youngster brought a USB memory stick in. It had a keygen tool on it to generate keys for inappropriate software use. Plugged it into the corporate network. The keygen was loaded with a virus, effectively, that penetrated their network. About 6 weeks later, it activated. It was a ransomware attack. And the saving grace for this company is that the way that they'd named their production environment was kind of different elsewhere. And what happened is their staging environments got nailed. Production managed to stay up, but the problem is that this code had propagated throughout the network. They were about 3 months into this attack when I spoke to them, and they were still trying to, they were kept on finding devices behind cupboards that got turned on that were reinfected and then reinfecting the environment. So it's serious. I mean, it really, and the problem is it takes a lot of time and effort to recover from those exploits and those hacks, and it's expensive. For a small business, it can be $50,000-$60,000 worth of cost at least to recover.
Now, I've heard you talk about Spaghetti IT. Now, that's not an IT company, just to be clear. But I think it's really relevant in the context of what you're talking about, because I think it adds to that risk factor. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and I'm sure most business owners can relate to this, is like when you start your business, there may be 3 or 4 or 5 of you, and you start with the sort of basic tools that you need for your business. So you might bring in, you might be doing your customer management in like an Excel spreadsheet, and you land up, as you grow, you start adding on technology functions to your business. And over time, what happens is you'll end up with an accounting system and a productivity suite and a telephony, a communication suite. And what happens over time is you land up with multiple different systems, none of which generally talk to each other without some significant investment. And then from a security perspective, the problem is that a lot of those systems each have their own way of authenticating. So now you've got passwords for each of these. And that becomes a real problem, because what do people do? They either store their passwords in a text file on their desktop, or they write it on a piece of paper next to their desk, or post it on a Post-it note. And as soon as someone's into one of those systems, they can then move laterally and get access to the rest. So that's I call it spaghetti IT, because it's kind of this interwoven mesh of technologies the business absolutely needs. But the more complex the spaghetti, the higher the risk footprint, or their tech, their tech foundation that bad actors have got to go after.
I think it's really relevant for SMBs as well, because a lot of the times we're trying to do it ourselves. And I think Kiwis in general, and we'll cover this a bit later, but Kiwis in general, we love the do-it-yourself, number 8 wire type of mentality. But I think for SMBs, it's a necessity sometimes to do it that way, but it creates risk.
Yeah, absolutely.
So before we move on to Gen AI, and I know we spoke to Nick in the last episode actually from Microsoft on this topic, and I will come back to that. But I wanted to ask you a little bit more around some of the types of challenges and exposures that businesses may have. So to throw one out there, right, we've talked about ransomware and malware, but what are some of the other ones that SMBs can be caught out with?
Yeah, on the Gen AI topic specifically, I think one is just to recognize that 3/4 of people are bringing Gen AI tools to work. They are using them within the work environment. And I think the one thing that businesses have to be mindful of is the delineation between what represents company data versus what goes out publicly. So if you, for example, take company data and publish it to a tool like a ChatGPT, for example, it's public domain. And I think it's very important for businesses to be aware of what I'd call a data boundary between what you need to keep within your business environments and what you can safely share externally. That's not going to introduce risk in terms of sharing company data externally, but also just in terms of educating your staff around what kind of the appropriate use of these tools is. Because in many respects they're brilliant, right? And they save us a heap of time. But probably another great example is I hopped on a call with a customer a couple of weeks back. It was a Teams call, and next minute there was this literally a thing that said bot like 647 or something in the Teams meeting, and I was like, guys, what's this? And oh no, it's this transcription bot that we use. I'm like, well, who is it? Where is it? What is it? And no one knew. So here they were, this company, they were having all of these meetings, bringing this bot in. That's fantastic because it was transcribing the meeting. No one knew where that information was going. So it's a really good example of respecting that. So I politely declined the bot and said, we need to remove it. We'll reconstitute that meeting within Teams and Copilot, in which case it's safe. But yeah, it's just a good example of how people are bringing risk into the business with good intention.
Yeah, I think that is really relevant because this Gen AI productivity gain is on its way, and everyone's going to be trying to work it out themselves. So unless you've got your own rules and provisions set up and policies set up, it's going to create risk. But is there any other tips on that Gen AI cybersecurity related side and that intersection that you would want to share?
Yeah, and maybe just let's maybe take a little bit of a step back from this perspective. One is just to start with the basics in place, right? One is to make sure that your environment and your devices are up to date. And the numbers show very clearly that it's very important just, for example, to update your device and make sure not only it's updated, but it also gets rebooted. And it sounds really simple, but staggering the number of people that don't. So those foundational layers that are in place to kind of do that. The other one is to make sure that you've got multi-factor authentication enabled. And whilst it's not directly related to the sort of Gen AI piece, it's still a foundational piece of just making sure that your basic security in place. So, multi-factor authentication is really important because it stops about 99.9% of authentication breaches purely because you've got an additional layer. And the feedback from people will say, oh, it's annoying to have to sign in, have these multiple ways of signing in and authentication. And I think you've got to make sure that you've got Microsoft's MFA has got a really cool thing called conditional access. So if I sign in and then it looks like I'm signing from somewhere that's odd. So for example, I sign in Auckland and 5 minutes later there's an attempt to sign in from a device in, I don't know, Eastern Europe somewhere. It's going to flag it and it's going to force it. It's going to say, this looks dodged. Let's put a secondary authentication mechanism. So there are ways to mitigate it, but I think those are kind of really simple examples of the baseline things. And then the third one is around, again, let's go back to that data boundaries, making sure from, whether you're a partner servicing, SMB customers or you're an SMB customer, and you're using these tools, make sure that the people that are using understand very, very clearly the delineation between what's your company data and what you need to be using internally and keeping internal versus that which you can go and safely create an image of something externally, which is a good example of something that would be, I guess, relatively safe. But do not put your company data onto the public domain generative AI tools. It's you wouldn't do it normally, so don't do it with the Gen AI stuff.
I think there's a wider mindset that, we'll catch up in time, but in the meantime, I think there's just some basic things that some people get caught out on because they're not necessarily aware of the impact. You reminded me of a situation that I'd heard a few weeks ago where I heard a partner talking about a customer that was really frustrated with the amount of updates coming through, and they'd almost referred it to the product itself being not good because it had all these updates. But actually flipping that, a business that's rolling out lots of security patches and updates is a really good thing, because it's actually providing additional security versus a product that might have been sitting there dormant for 3 months with no security patch update or any updates. I think I'd be more comfortable with the one with lots of updates, to be fair.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And I think that it's the balance, right? It's how fast, especially if it's critical updates and they're all vulnerabilities that are going to keep coming up all the time. And again, back to my point on the investment from the bad actors' perspective, as they get access to some of these tools which allow them to be kind of smarter in terms of the way that they're creating these things, the requirement for us to be like really agile in terms of being able to apply those updates is enormous. And I mean, as a company, Microsoft's analyzing literally trillions and trillions of these signals coming into our systems all the time to get a view on what's going on. And when we found vulnerabilities, we need to publish updates to keep those devices as safe as possible.
Yeah, it might initially seem like an annoyance, but I'd much prefer a security update than no security update. That's for sure.
Yeah. Now, ask someone who's been breached, and I guess they'll tell you that they prefer to have had the update. Yeah. Yes.
Now I'm going to move into kind of cloud services for a moment, and there's been a rapid adoption of cloud services, not just in New Zealand. I think we've been fast adopters, but generally speaking, cloud adoption has been huge, right? But that has also significantly increased the attack surface, for organizations. And APIs remain at the top. But for SMBs, that one might not be as interesting as probably some of the other attack vectors. So, maybe you could share with us just a few of those other attack vectors for SMBs specifically that they should be aware of.
Yeah, I mean, this is, we could probably talk about this all day, but I'll probably call out just two. The one is the risk of, I'm going to use the word insider threats. So this is people who've got access to your internal data that either unintentionally or intentionally going to cause a breach. And my example of the student, the previous one is, whilst I'm sure he knew he was doing something that was a little bit dodgy, though he certainly didn't. I'm sure intentionally caused that breach. So I think the one thing is just absolutely critical to make sure that staff are trained, that staff are aware, and that awareness is constantly refreshed. And the Microsoft view on this is what we call zero trust, and it's making the assumption that if anything bad's going to happen, you've got to be prepared for it, right? And if you look at that notion of that student, if there was a zero trust policy in place there from that perspective, he would either not have been allowed to have brought that device in, or if he had, we would have assumed that device was dangerous and therefore blocked it. As soon as it was inserted, it would have been blocked. So that insider threat is really important. Another really good example is a business here I know on the North Shore where someone left the business with all the company data, right? So it's an insider, took all the company data, and then that poses an entirely other risk. And there's a way of mitigating those. So I think being aware of that people will intentionally or unintentionally cause some issues. And the second one maybe is it's fairly obvious, but is the one around ransomware. I'd be super aware if you get hit with a ransomware breach and they lock you down, there's nothing you can do, right? You either pay the money and then hope that you get the key to unlock, or you've got to make sure that you've got a backup plan in place, and whether that be physical backup to take your documents or whatever it is off where, or you use something like previous versioning in SharePoint to make sure that there are previous versions of those documents that won't be exposed to those so that you can recover. So I think those are two really, again, it's relatively straightforward, but people I think seem to be a little bit until it happens to me. Right? That's kind of where it is. So yeah.
Don't need to learn the hard way, I guess, on that one.
Yep.
Now, flipping it slightly into more pitfalls, right? What are some common pitfalls that SMBs should avoid?
Yeah. Well, the first one is that it can't happen to me, because it can, and it probably will. And I think it sounds a little bit like scare tacking, but kind of my mantra would be work on the basis that it will happen, and then make sure that you've got plans in place to mitigate against that. And I think the other one is that pitfall is that that there is a cost to not investing in the cybersecurity place. So you can make the call as a business and say, I'm prepared to take the risk. But if you do that, understand that if you do get breached, there is going to be a cost and a real risk to your business.
So you mentioned, poor, proper cybersecurity, like planning. I guess having a plan in place.
Yep.
I think that's really, really key. And what kind of pops into my head is that UPS or similar, where you've got a power and you haven't tested it, right?
Yep.
And then you get a power outage. And it's like, oh, I should have tested it because now my whole infrastructure's gone down, everything's gone down, whatever it might be.
Yep.
So, or even from a data security perspective and a data backup perspective, testing those backups so that
Yep.
that your data is good in a situation, right? So, from a Kiwi perspective, I think we've got an extra she'll be right attitude that kind of factors in there. But do you think that's getting in the way, or do you think there's another factor?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really simple. Is you've got to ask your question. If I get breached, or maybe the question is when I get breached, how do I recover and how long is it going to take me? And I think that if you're not clear on an answer to that question, then you've got to know. And I think the way that you know is to get your environment assessed, know where you stand, do pen tests, test your backups, get some expert advice on that in terms of where you need to be. Because the eighth wire scenario here in some instances may work, but I think you've got to look at it from that point of view of not what's the worst case scenario here, but if this was to happen, what's my way out and how long is it going to take me to kind of get back and running? For lots of small businesses, if you think about being offline or inactive for a week, what's the consequence of that? It really is significant. So making that upfront planning in terms of, it's a little bit like. The analogy I suppose I could use is if you lived in Christchurch, which is pretty vulnerable from an earthquake perspective. As a business, how do you plan for that scenario? You've got to do exactly the same thing from a cyber risk perspective because the risk is exactly the same, just in a different form.
Great. I think that moves us really nicely into that resources point,
Yep.
part. And I know Cert NZ, and there was actually a particular government website, Own Your Online, that have some great resources that everyone has access to, and we'll make sure that we include those links in the description. And the good news is those are specifically designed for SMBs, right? But what other resources would you call out? I mean, I know Microsoft have a wealth of resources across the board, but what would you call out?
Yeah, I would go to, let's start with Cert's guidance is really, really great, right? So they've got 8 steps in terms of what you can do to the basics for cybersecurity. Microsoft also has got guidelines, which they follow a similar kind of mantra. So again, resources are included. So folks can go and click and have a look. There are other broader questions or broader information sources or structured programs that you can implement. The one I'd call out is ISO 27001. And that's quite interesting because it's an international standard for information security and management systems. And it's a really good framework for organizations to manage and protect the information systematically within a structure. Back in my CTO role, we actually made it a requirement of some of our key suppliers to be ISO 27001 certified because of some of the information that was going between us. So it's good for you as a business to be able to say, hey, I've achieved this. But it also puts some of the rigor that you need to have in place around information management protection and that. So that would be a really good one. And then if you're really, really kind of keen and want to go deep, the US has got a really great cybersecurity framework for SMBs, and they've got a quick start guide, which I thought was really, really good. If you're an MSP or a channel partner that's providing services to businesses, it gives you a really good view on what questions your customers might be asking of you if you're providing this as a service to them. And equally as a customer, it gives you some really good questions to go back to your service provider, whoever it is that's accountable in your business for providing this cybersecurity protection, just to ask the right questions and make sure that those things are in place. So that's a really good, again, in those resources, we've got links to those resources. So that's a really good place.
Right.
And then last one is just, and again, it's fairly obvious, but make sure that you've got the right either internal or external resources and skills that are accountable to your business for protecting you. And whether that be, if you're in the Microsoft security stack, a Microsoft certified partner in that space, or whoever's providing that, just to make sure that they, they're up to speed because it is moving so fast.
It is, and I'm glad you mentioned channel partners in there as well. Even from an Ingram Micro perspective, we have an army of experts and solution architects and technical understanding that we can help channel partners, but also their customers through them to kind of go on this journey. But from a channel partner perspective, is there any other resources that you'd flag or reference?
Yeah, the first pass has to be the solution partner for security solution designations. That's really great. So if you're in the Microsoft security space, that's really where you want to aim for. And then, of course, there's a massive plethora of both deep technical training on the security platform, across the Microsoft resources. So definitely would call that out.
Great. And I know we've covered things at quite a fast pace here today, but is there anything else that you would want to call out? Maybe any tips or thoughts for partners, SMB businesses, just to stay ahead?
Yeah. I think with the evolution of the Gen AI tools, and obviously Microsoft making massive investment into the space, if you're a partner and you haven't looked at the Microsoft Copilot for Security, definitely worthwhile taking a look. So this is an AI-powered cybersecurity solution, which is really around enhancing the sort of efficiency and capability of that security platform, security professionals. So it's using Gen AI to provide insights and recommendations for for some of these incidents. And the ability to respond at machine speed, if it detects breaches. It also integrates across the Microsoft security stack, so across Defender, Sentinel, Intune, as well as into third-party services as well. So I think it's a really great tool to help with incident response, threat hunting, and that posture management and those kinds of things. And I think maybe one of the things I really liked is the ability of tools like this to reverse engineer some of the malware. So you're using kind of AI to reverse engineer some of the bad actor activity that's happening, which I think is great. So I think as these tools evolve, I think something like Copilot for Security is going to be a critical tool to help partners, help their customers just stay on top of where things are at from a security perspective.
Great. I don't think anyone would argue with the fact that things are getting more complex than ever before, right? So anything to simplify sounds great. Any other tips or any other things that you'd want to share for partners or customers or SMBs?
Yeah, I think it's really around being proactive in the space. Those that are investing to get into your company are not waiting, right? They're not waiting around, and it is serious. It is a bit of a hard story to tell, and it's not really around fear mongering, but I think is to acknowledge that this is a very real threat. It's a very real threat to all businesses, regardless of size. And if you do get breached, the consequences can be super significant. So, build this as part, if you're a business, make this as part of your strategic plan, right? What does my business continuity look like in the event of a cyber breach, and make sure it's part of that. It's on the minutes in your board meetings. Make sure that it's tabled and it's taken seriously, because it is serious.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I've sort of taken away, I've taken away a few things actually, but the one thing that stood out to me was that making a plan no matter how big you are, and
Absolutely.
I think taking that approach of, hey, I'm a small business, doesn't really matter, we'll just wing it. Got to have a plan.
Yeah. Hey, and what also came to mind, maybe last thing, is use a password manager. So the number of people that are using, the stats again are staggering. I think passwords are used, 70% of passwords are duplicate. So if someone gets one, they're going to get access to most of the things that you've got access to. So use a password manager and make your passwords complex, so that it just makes it that much more difficult for people to access. And then I suppose also as we're going to get to the phase where we're starting to see the advent of pass keys, which is also really great, because now you don't have to worry about the passwords anymore. So things are moving. So yeah, get a password manager would be a good tip.
And don't write that password down.
And don't write that one down.
And have MFA enabled.
And have MFA enabled on your password manager. And don't set the password as Monday 123. It's not a good idea.
Great, awesome. Okay, well, so we're on to the final part. We call this 5 and 5. We ask the same 5 questions to every guest that comes along and joins. So there shouldn't be any surprises there. Basically, 5 seconds to answer each question. All right, so first question I've got is, what book, app, or show would you miss the most on a deserted island?
That has to be Peter Thiel's podcasts on longevity. Fascinating.
Okay, good to know. We might have to include a link in the description.
Yeah.
All right, question number 2, your favorite movie featuring AI?
That would have to be Terminator 2, just because of the tech that was required to generate some of that flowing leady. Yeah, those effects were just astonishing. So it has to be Terminator 2.
I'm sure there'll be plenty that agree with you on that one. That's a great movie. All right, question number 3. What does your social media algorithm think you're obsessed with?
Peregrine falcons.
Okay, you're going to have to give me a bit more detail. We'll give you more than 5 seconds on that one.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I have a massive fascination for birds of prey, broadly speaking, but I think the peregrine just has to be the most incredible raptor out there, right? 300 k's an hour plus. They are the most amazing hunters. And I'll share this. I was in Botswana in April, and I was overlooking a waterhole, and a peregrine took out a dove that was in front of me on the ground, and it was literally like a whoosh, smack, feathers gone. Wow. Just the most amazing bird. So I get my social feed just peppers me with peregrine falcons.
Fair enough. All right, question number 4. What piece of outdated technology do you miss the most and why?
Well, the Microsoft people will smile at me, but for me, it has to be the Windows Phone. And I had one for quite a while. I had a Nokia Lumia 920, and it was just the most incredible phone. And I was a very sad day when we had to kind of shut that program down, but that was a great piece of tech.
Great. All right, last question. If you could share one game-changing productivity tip to save time, what would it be?
Use Copilot for Microsoft Teams. Just to summarize, categorize your meetings. It's just the most amazing tool, and it saves me hours and hours. So yeah, Copilot in Teams is just incredible.
Awesome. I'm glad you mentioned that one. We've just been doing some training demos on it, and it's so powerful, so powerful.
Yep, that's great.
Awesome. Well, that brings us to the end of our episode today. Thank you for joining us. It's been great to have you. Thanks for coming along.
Oh, no, thank you. It's been great.
Thanks for tuning in today, and a special thanks to Microsoft for sponsoring this episode. If there are any guests or topics you would like to see featured, connect with me on LinkedIn. You'll find the links in the description. Don't forget to subscribe, and see you next time.